They claim to have created a new state of matter. We get artificial superintelligence that could code, and it could code itself, so it continually codes itself to get better and better and better. There's also a possibility the singularity doesn't happen. Maybe that AI kind of stops where it is right now. Now, a superposition particle is two things at once. It doesn't currently have a state. I guess the theory is the dead cat is another universe, because that was another possibility. UFOs and UAPs, Carl Jung's famous for referring to them as angels and demons. Say what you will about Jordan Peterson, I think his ideas are excellent. The apocalypse you could easily see practically, right? That's something like nuclear war, something like runaway evil AI. It's kind of like this idea if like a UFO falls and we reverse engineer the UFO and start flying it around. We probably have no idea how that technology works. Imagine immersive VR time capsule that let users experience interactive reconstructions of historical events from ancient Rome to roaring 20s. Gave the average person a life that is far better than what the kings were living like hundreds of years ago. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Dominic Stocchetti podcast. Today, we have an interesting one in store for you. I suppose that every week at this point, there are interesting things going on. It seems that I am never short of some interesting headline to read, some interesting piece to read on Substack, or some interesting podcast. Feels like Joe Rogan at this point. He's one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. Always has at least one interesting figure every week, but for the most part, every single podcast that he releases is super interesting. And yeah, it's honestly exciting. It's an exciting time. And it's similar to what I alluded to last week. It seems like we are navigating our way through the end of one era into another. And with that, certainly comes chaos and potential for ruin and destruction. But on the positive end comes the opportunity for the opposite of that, for great flourishing of humanity and great opportunity for people who are ambitious enough to follow truth, to pursue their interests into the future. So I think we have interesting times ahead of us. And this week will be a microcosm of an interesting time. What I'm going to talk through today, there was a really interesting headline from Microsoft in terms of quantum computing. Now, I don't know a lot about quantum computing. I am obviously not a physicist, and I'm not an expert in quantum computing. Every time I do deep research in it, I feel like I understand it. And then after 5 minutes, I come back to it. And after a night's sleep, I come back to it and I can't, it's hard to explain or conceptualize. So we are going to talk about it, and I will try to explain it best I can. But I will disclaim now that it may not be extremely accurate, but I will try. Interestingly, with this headline from Microsoft and in their quantum computing division, they claim to have created a new state of matter. That was sort of the headline, the eye-capturing headline as part of this, which this new state of matter would has drastically improved the quantum computing paradigm as opposed to the normal computing paradigm. So that's where we'll start. And I also want to talk about this. I read a really interesting piece about the how right now we live like kings of the past. And this is just another reflection on how far we've come and how beautiful technology is. Because at the end of the episode, we are going to talk about the apocalypse and the Antichrist. So Peter Thiel, who is a famous investor, he was a founder of PayPal, was a venture capitalist, pretty prolific and famous thinker in America, at least, and especially in the technology space. And he's been talking a lot and thinking a lot about sort of apocalyptic narratives. And I don't think that's a coincidence, to be quite honest. I think, and this is something Jung pointed out in his book Ion. I believe I touched on this last week. And the idea is that we are at the end of an epic, a 2,000-year period, where the collective personality is changing. And I think through that collective change, there is, as I said at the beginning, potential for great destruction, but there's also potential for great beauty. And it's just navigating through that straight and narrow path. So I think the way through that straight and narrow path are for people to speak up, tell the truth, and pursue interests that are relevant to them, bear the responsibility of the the things that interest you, and try to deliver and put your best foot forward on those things. So, um, yeah, that's what I'm doing today. Is I'm going to talk through these things that interest me, but of course, I like to, as is the nature, if you've been a reader of the Frontier Letter, that my Substack that I write, you know that my perspective is wholeness. My thinking is heavily influenced by Carl Jung, and he had this idea that individuation was absolutely necessary for the path through a through the path through a very destructive time post World War II, with nukes and the potential for destruction, that the collective needed to embody and understand their capability for destruction, right? Integrate the potential terrible within them. And by integrating it, you can make your way through the other end of darkness and bear it for good purposes. And maybe as I talk through this sort of apocalyptic narrative that's rising in the culture, that maybe I'll think a little bit about it as I come to it. So yeah, that's what we have in store, and I'll finish by talking about technologies that I think are emerging and why I think they're currently emerging. I think they're going to be more protocol based, mind and spirituality protocol based technologies, and I think that's something that is being people are being more open to. We're seeing the large media figures discuss this, being large media figures being Joe Rogan. We're seeing him interview people who are discussing these protocols to do what is typically in the past would be referred to as woo woo, right? Like rolling out, having out of body experiences, um, technologies that have to do, I mean, dream analysis, right? I would conceptualize dream analysis as a technology, being that you're improving your state of being by depicting a message from a natural source, whatever that is. Um, there we have I could put forth hypotheses about what exactly that is, but when we get there, we'll see what thoughts emerge. Again, one way I like to describe this podcast is kind of a brain dump, rough draft of the things that have interested me the past week, and out of it, I hope that seeds of ideas are born where I could write about them in the future on the Frontier Letter. And I also hope to grow this platform to a point where I could start interviewing people. I could at least I could have the influence to start interviewing people so that I could learn more about these ideas instead of just talking about things that interest me. I could talk about things that interest me with people who are experts on those things. And I hope that's where we go. So let's just go and jump right into it. So the first thing I did want to talk about is this idea of the technological singularity. So the technological singularity, right? This is a point in time where tech advances so rapidly that the effect on human civilization is hard to predict. Now, this is something like the emergence of artificial superintelligence that iterates on itself repeatedly, right? An artificial superintelligence who has the ability to code and can continually iterate on itself is sort of this exponential curve we'll be on, and we'll have a hard time truly conceptualizing what that exponential curve looks like. And one way I've always liked to sort of think about this is, imagine we get to this point, this technological singularity, and we're on the horizon. I think it's possible. I don't know this for certain, but I think it's possible we're on that horizon right now. And I think actually why my mind went to the singularity as the sort of starter for this episode was that I saw Elon Musk tweet about being on the event horizon of the singularity. So the way I like to think about the singularity is, right, a hypothetical time until a hypothetical scenario that leads up to the singularity. We get an artificial superintelligence that could code, and it could code itself, so it continually codes itself to get better and better and better. And from which point forward, we have no idea what happens. I mean, there are sort of funny ways to look at this. Like I like to think that we wake up one day and we just see these monoliths flying through the sky, and we have no fucking clue what they're doing flying through the sky, because they might serve some purpose that the artificial intelligence sees as a fundamental utility to themselves in relation to their place in the universe and their goal in the universe, but we have no clue what it is. Um, I mean, for all we know, create, they could create. I like to think about it like this. Placing a, it'd be like placing a air conditioning unit. And I think actually Eliezer Yudkowsky in on a Lex Friedman podcast used this example. It'd be like placing an AC unit in the 1500s. Everybody in the castle would feel the cool air and they would realize how beneficial this is for them, but they would have no idea what the inner workings of this thing are. It's kind of like this idea if like a UFO falls and we reverse engineer the UFO and start flying it around. We probably have no idea how that technology works, but nevertheless, we know how to use it. So I think we'd get to this point where there would be the creation of these technologies that, or the movement forward in a way that we just can't understand because we don't know anymore. We have no grasp on what this artificial intelligence is doing. Now, there's this thing called AI alignment, AI safety alignment. For those who are unfamiliar, this is the idea of aligning an AI model with the best intention of humans. And by doing so, when we do get to this hypothetical point, the AI might run away and we have no control over it. In fact, it has control over us. But if it has our best intentions at heart, then there's a chance that a chance that we wouldn't be harmed in the making of the singularity. Now, there's also a possibility the singularity doesn't happen. Maybe that AI kind of stops where it is right now. Doesn't look that way if all the charts point to AI continually improving, but there is a chance that maybe we get to a point where AI is super useful for us in an organization and through our work, and it creates all this great productivity growth, the cost of goods goes down, and we're all better off for it. But I don't know, it seems to me that this point in time for the singularity actually makes a lot of sense, to be quite honest. That I mean, the logic follows. If an AI could code, and if the AI has access to its own code base and could continually iterate on its code, and it could do so 24/7, then how would it not? I guess the only way it wouldn't be able to continually make itself better is if it couldn't novelly think through any ideas. But I mean, it seems that that AI already could think through novel ideas and create new ideas. I mean, if you ask an AI for a list of 10 new business ideas that don't exist, it would give you a list of 10 business ideas that don't exist. I mean, I could do it right now as we're talking through it, and I'll run you through the list and we could see what it says. I'll use, what should I use? Let's use ChatGPT. We'll use its O3 mini fast and advanced reasoning model. What are 10 business ideas that don't currently exist? Provide me with a list and the likelihood of success of running these businesses. it's gonna think for a little bit, but I mean, the reason I'm doing this is to show the point that, well, like I said, there is a possibility the singularity doesn't happen. I don't know. It seems to me there's two camps. There's a camp of the people who, let's just call them decelerationist for the sake of using the terms of culture as already invented. They tend to over catastrophize the potential flaws and over catastrophize the path and current ability of AIs. But then we have the overly optimistic, naive individuals. I would call them something like naive optimists who they tend to downplay AI's capabilities. They, in a sense, they are excited for how great these AI models are, but they downplay the fact of its capability to cause harm. Oh, look at that. I mean, that's kind of a really cool idea, actually. So ChatGPT came up with this idea: virtual time travel experiences. Imagine immersive VR time capsule let users experience interactive reconstructions of historical events from ancient Rome to Roaring Twenties. Gamified storytelling combined with cutting-edge VR tech could transport users into history. Okay, that's a really good idea. That's actually, I mean, just saying that out loud, I mean, that'd be kind of cool. I don't know if you've ever done one of these. They're called sandbox VR experiences in a mall near where I live. My wife and I did one of these experiences, and yeah, it was really fun. It was really cool to be in a room and able to walk around with a VR headset on and go through one of these experiences. I think that's yeah, that would be really cool. Okay, point aside, it kind of feels like to me we're riding this exponential wave of the singularity. And Ray Kurzweil, who's a famous, I think they call him a futurist or something, but he's an AI researcher, intellectual of our times. He wrote a book about the singularity. He has many of these charts that show, I mean, it's quite hard to contest that we're on this exponential curve. And I think humans are just have a hard time feeling the I think humans have a hard time feeling the exponential when they're in it. We have this great ability to adapt, humans. It's a great thing, right? Whenever terrible times happen, it's chaotic for a little bit, but we manage our way through and we adapt to whatever that new paradigm is, which is great. It is a great feature of humans. When a chaotic time is happening in your life, you want to be able to adapt quickly and use sound and solid judgment to get through the chaotic times. But it also means that if we're on an exponential curve and it's happening step by step, day by day, we're all slowly adapting, right? We're slowly adapting, especially if you're on the forefront of thinking about these things, right? If you haven't paid attention to AI at all since 2015 and you look today, you'll be blown away. Like you'll think we have thinking machines. I think at least because I think we just adapt and move on. And that is why it's hard to sort of one of the reasons it's hard to see that we're on the sort of cusp of the singularity. And AI is like a good pointer to the singularity, but another aspect, right, is quantum computing. So I'm just going to read you a quote from the article. Of course, all these links will be in the description. So Microsoft's topological qubit, right? This is the new state of matter I referenced at the beginning of the episode. So we view this as something years away, not decades away. Okay, well, that was an anticlimactic buildup for that quote. But um, I think that quote was in regards to the quantum computing paradigm where it starts to become a material object, it starts having material effect on the things that we do. So quantum computing is always something that blows my mind every time I look into it. Whenever I think about quantum computing, I always go back to our our current our current state of computing. Our current state of computing is zeros and ones. It's binary, right? If we break it down to let's break it down to the atom, right? Our current computing paradigm involves semiconductors, which transmit electric signals that essentially the electric signals are sent and they either indicate an on or an off position, 0 or 1. That on or off, the zeros and ones, make up that's the lowest level language of code in a computer, and they make up sequences of calculations, sequences of code, code and calculations which account for certain operations in the computer, right? If I click the letter B, there is a set of zeros and ones that make up the letter B to display on the computer. What that is, it's an electrical signal being sent to a chip, which flips on and off very quickly. And that's our current state of computing, right? It's on off, electrical signals on off. So quantum computing is the reason it's so mind blowing is because it uses quantum physics. Now, physics is itself mind blowing. To me, quantum physics is like magic. I mean, it really is. It feels like it is a discovery that we know about that proves anything is possible. And the reason I say that is because in quantum physics, and like I said at the beginning, my understanding of this, I'm not a physicist, and everything I say here is subject to error. So take that disclaimer with what you will. So in quantum computing, utilizing quantum physics, there's this idea of superpositioned particles. Now, a superposition particle is two things at once. It doesn't currently have a state. Now, for it to actually have a state, it has to be measured, right? It's so weird. It's this thing called the observer effect that particle is not yet existing in a state until it's measured. Something like this. Which it's so weird. So you're telling me that if you don't that until observed, something exists in multiple states at once? Well, it seems that that is the case because in quantum computing, the instead of being a 0 or a 1, it exists in both states at once. It is simultaneously a 1 and a 0 because it's superpositioned into both states, and until observed, until officially recorded, it is both those states of matter, which is um yeah, like I said, it's magic. It's both a 0 and a 1, right? So the quantum computing freezes a computing device to negative 400 degrees, and the bit, right, the bit being the 0 or the 1, it becomes superpositioned, meaning it's both a 1 and a 0. Hence, qubit, meaning that given the amount of values and combination of values it could hold at once, right? Instead of binary, it's 4. So, I mean, think of, right, the easiest way to think about superposition is Schrodinger's cat, right? It goes something like if a cat's in a box and you can't see it, it is both dead and alive at the same time, right? This is where the theory of multiple universes opens up as well, because if it is both and you open the box and the cat is living, then that I guess the theory is the dead cat is another universe because that was another possibility. So the computer, I believe, solves problems a lot faster because instead of it having to be 0, 1, so to run a really big calculation, it has to flip 0, 1 for many different calculations and code sets in a computer. It could exist as multiple ones and zeros at once. So all of that is to say that magic is real. And you heard it here first. Magic is real. If Harry Potter didn't convince you that magic was real, then I hope that the Microsoft quantum computing computer did, because um, Microsoft said it created a new state of matter, and that is quite unbelievable. And from that, I had to, usually when I'm preparing for these episodes, I kind of just, I pay a very close attention to the things that interest me through the week that I'm reading, listening to, and I make note of them and just kind of come here and rattle off my thoughts on them and see what comes, which is why I kind of stumble my way through sometimes. These aren't heavily scripted, and that's the idea. I don't want these to be heavily scripted. The heavily scripted videos are on my channel, and you can find them on my channel throughout. And you could also, the heavily scripted videos come downstream from my writing. Now, one thing that really drew my interest was this headline, and it's from this publication called The New Atlantis, which love that name, written by Charles C. Mann, and it's called "We Live Like Royalty and Don't Know It." Introducing how the system works, a series on the hidden mechanisms that support a modern life. Now, as I was reading this, Charles made a really good point in this. Thomas Jefferson, one of the richest men in the United States, had a horse-drawn carriage, and the ink in his pen would freeze in the middle of the night because of how cold it was, and the lack of infrastructure to heat the dwelling enough so that his pen's ink wouldn't freeze. There was yellow fever. The clean water was not a commonplace. I mean, you have to think about that, right? Just thinking about that alone, I live better than Thomas Jefferson did, and it's just amazing to think about that. That the average person lives better than the top of the highest at the highest level in America 200 years ago. The average person today lives better than the person that was at the top level, even at the highest levels of the hierarchy hundreds of years ago in the United States. I don't have to worry about the ink in my pen freezing because it's hot in here, and also because I have a electronic pen. I mean, times are significantly different, and this is something that I think is kind of like what we talked about earlier, the adaptability of humans. It's both a flaw, it's both a feature and a bug. It's great that we adapt to the new times, because then we could reflect and say, this needs to be better. We always want something to be better, right? And I truly believe that is a feature of humans, because as we look at things and chaos emerges from those particular things. For example, let's say the heating infrastructure in my house, right? It's far better than it was 200 years ago. But if I really took the time to focus on how to make it better, I'm sure I could find something. We're essentially capped by the highest level of innovation in a given time. And I think it's always good that we try to continually punch through the ceiling of particular innovations or particular inventions in a society, because it's the only way that we continue to grow. And this is a great thing that humans do because it helps us continue to grow, and it helps us create these beautiful things so that someone like me could live better than Thomas Jefferson did. Now, the bug is that if if we don't consistently reflect and express gratitude for the things that we have been granted from technology, we have there's a worry of forgetting about sheer effort and forgetting about the systems, which is kind of what this article gets to, that we forget about the systems and mechanisms that support this infrastructure of modern life. And that's not good, because if we forget about the infrastructure that supports modern life and forget about the way that things have been built, we risk losing those things because we lose the knowledge to actually keep that infrastructure afloat. But it is pretty amazing how far we've come. Now, with that being said, technology definitely has provided us with great things. And I think that, and something I've touched on last week, I think we're going to be entering an era of I think that we're entering an era of extremely advanced technology. And by the time this podcast is out, I will have published a piece on the Frontier Letter by the name of Man in Need of Myth. And the idea there is that it's an idea I've been thinking about for a really long time, doing a lot of reading on. And I was watching Mark Andreessen, who's famously one of the partners, founders of Andreessen Horowitz, I believe the biggest venture capital firm in the world. He was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he had mentioned a religious scholar friend that he had talked to, and his friend made the point that medieval humans would have been better psychologically prepared a to deal with the technological era of AI, robots, rockets that we going to other planets that we find ourselves in, because they axiomatically accepted that higher beings existed. And maybe they would have viewed AI as something like a technological manifestation of an angel or something like that. And I was kind of playing around with that idea for a while, and I decided to just formally like put the piece down, think through it, and fully edit through the piece. I had many different pieces floating, many different of those ideas floating around in different drafts. And to me, I see three solutions through this. One is a solution that was put forward by the famous philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, and his solution was that we would explicitly create our own values. I personally don't think that that option is possible through my reading of Carl Jung. There's option two, which is a return to the traditional religious structure, so return to Christianity, to Islam, to Judaism. I think that option is probably better than one, but with its flaws. And then I think that there's the third option, which is this acceptance of modern myths that are emerging. And I think that though that modern myth is something like a technological religion with sub myths rooted in the simulation hypothesis, which is something like a creation myth, UFOs and UAPs. Carl Jung's famous for referring to them as angels and demons. I think Tucker Carlson has made the same claims, that he believes UFOs are modern angels and demons. And AI, I see, is also a subcomponent of that technological myth. And I sort of lay out the necessity of story in a human's life through that piece, because I mean, it seems, and based on the science, right? I'm no, like I said, I'm no doctor. I just am very interested in these things and try my best to articulate what the state of these given ideas are, or of my understanding of these given ideas. But through my understanding the of listening to Jordan Peterson talk about story and research I did for that piece, it seems that story is something fundamental to humans. It's how we actually orient ourselves in the world. And you could even break that down neurologically, because goals and sub goals, we conceptualize ourselves as characters, and our path forward is oriented by goals. And those goals are created from an overarching goal, which is downstream of some vision of the future. And a vision of the future is a story. And we could see that, I mean, it has to be a story. You can't a vision of the future is, in essence, it's fiction, right? It hasn't happened yet. Um, so we could even see that the achieving of goals releases dopamine and produces positive emotion. So, and obstacles produce negative emotion, namely anxiety, distress. So we see that pathways towards goals are mediated by our brain, and that goals are rooted in a vision of the future, which is, in essence, a definition of a story. Which is, by the way, I'm playing around with this idea of fact being actually fiction, actually like fictional stories and fiction being at least on par with fact. Like maybe these are two separate dimensions, realms of existence that both deserve they're separate hierarchies and both deserve a superordinate position on the higher on their own hierarchies. Or maybe even fiction should supersede fact. And the reason I say that is if the story truly is what directs the goals, then and the direction of the goals is what opens our perceptual fields to the facts, to the objective world, the logic seems to me to point to fiction being the core driver of our existence, which is kind of interesting to even say out loud. But I mean, it kind of feels that way too. Uh, I'm more emotionally drawn to my collective story with my wife and the story of my future with the Frontier Letter and my career and my family than I am drawn. I'm more excited and drawn to those things than I am drawn to material objects, right? I think if you're heavily obsessed with material objects, it's because it's rooted in some story about the importance of those material objects. So in essence, we're always signaling value at things, and that value has to be downstream of some story that is told or accepted. And this could be unconscious, right? This isn't to say that everybody has some conscious story they're walking around living, which is why I think in those options I laid out as it relates to myth, that option 2 and 3 are my favorites because in option 1, creating explicit values for yourself runs into this problem of inability to one, integrate newness, but importantly and relatedly to what I've just said, the inability to grasp and direct us in ways that we cannot yet comprehend. And I think stories do that better. Jordan Peterson explores this really well in his book his book Maps of Meaning. Say what you will about Jordan Peterson, I think his ideas are excellent. And that book that he wrote I think he actually wrote that book in the late 90s. It's a great multi-dimensional exploration. And I think it hits on this point exactly, and even has a great chart in there. I'll leave the description link below to the piece I wrote about man in need of myth. But downstream of that, I'm going to explore all the emergent myths that I see coming. And one of them is that I'm looking into is sort of the UFO UAP phenomena, which itself I think is sort of I think it'll be I think it's something analogous to like the story of Noah's Ark is part of the Old Testament religion, the religions around the Old Testament. I think the UFOs is going there'll be some myth surrounded by a greater new religion. it's almost impossible to say what that is, to be honest. It'd be like somebody saying during the times of Jesus Christ, right? It'd be like somebody saying that we're going to have this new religion, Christianity, and the whole world is going to accept it. It's too hard to say while you're living in it. But I mean, this is well explored. This idea of UFOs as a new religion by Diana Pasulka, who wrote two very great books. I'm in the middle. Listened to her book, her most recent book, Encounters. Encounters is the name of the book. Encounters Interaction with Non-Human Intelligence, I believe is the full name. And then she has a book before that by the name of American Cosmic. And I'm reading that right now. Really interesting book. And she's essentially drawing the parallel between UFOs, modern UFOs, and the relation to religion. So that will be something that comes down the line. If you're interested in that sort of thing, I recommend you subscribe to the Frontier Letters. I'm going to explore those things in the future. Now, interestingly, as part of that exploration, I've been listening to Peter Thiel. He's been talking about the apocalypse and the Antichrist, and sort of this dichotomy in I think it's in the Book of Revelation, where there's a warning about these two things to come, an apocalypse and the Antichrist. You could say, like, if you want to put these in very practical terms, like, step aside from the religious terms if they bother you. The apocalypse you could easily see practically, right? That's something like nuclear war. It's something like runaway evil AI, right? Those things I think are kind of easy to think through practically. And I think the Antichrist, it's a little more abstract, but to me, you could just kind of see it as a personality that is indirect. It's anti-Christ, personality in the opposite way of Christ, which is something, I don't know, something approximating Adolf Hitler. It's something approximating a one world government, being that the idea of Christ is a embodiment of the divine in every individual. The Antichrist is the embodiment of the divine to control at a single point at the top. It's kind of like I would almost say it's a regression to that idea that the king is the embodiment of the divine and everybody else is subservient to the king. And maybe we've seen that I think we've definitely seen that in Adolf Hitler, the Antichrist and the apocalyptic narrative running alongside each other. Jung pointed to this idea that it seemed like at the end of the this epoch, this ion, the 2,000 year period, that the next era would give birth to the opposite of the Christ figure, which would be the Antichrist. And the path to wholeness through all of this is the integration of the Antichrist with the Christ. That's essentially what I haven't gone through the book, but I think that my understanding right now is that the way through the apocalypse is the integration of Christ and Antichrist personalities in every individual through a path of wholeness, namely through the Jungian individuation process, if that's the spiritual journey that you decide to follow. It sounds right. Now, these things are so abstract, and they're, again, maybe a theme of today's episode is that it's hard to see it when you're in it. But by having these conversations and thinking about it, it becomes a little more clear it is when it is in front of you. Now, I'm going to be wrapping up here. I think that the future of technology will be sort of going inwards. And I think this is related because I hold the opinion that we have become very technologically advanced, which is excellent. This is a great thing. I'm not decelerationist. I want to make that clear. I'm very hopeful about technology. I really do think we should accelerate, and I'm optimistic about where it goes. But I do think that we are stunted spiritually and psychologically because it's kind of a paradox. Personality that gave birth the great these great innovations, it was also the personality that stunted us in our religious and psychological development, essentially. And that's something like a enlightenment scientific materialism, which gave us excellent innovations and back to living like royalty, gave the average person a life that is far better than what the kings were living like hundreds of years ago. But I think that the new era of technology is going to be something approximating protocols that allow us to get more in touch with our spirituality and improve our psychology. I think we're seeing a sort of generational, at least my generation. I was born in 97, so I'm technically Gen Z. I'm one of the first few years of Gen Z. At least in my generation, definitely. I mean, you probably started to see it with the millennials. Is the sort of adoption of psychological protocols to improve mental health. And I think that alongside that, I think that should and will continue. But at least in my approximation, I think it may have pigeoned into a specific subset of psychological protocols, which is like something like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. I think that it seems, and I think the reason that happened is because it seems that that produces the best results, and it's a great way to get somebody better relatively quickly, and it improves someone's psychological condition. But I think that alongside that, there needs to be a spiritual growth, which is why the Jungian approach was always very appealing to me because he seems to blend the psychological with the spiritual. And I just think that in this era, we're going to see some of these really interesting things like now see here's this is where the woo woo comes in. Um Joe Rogan interviewed a guy by the name of Thomas Campbell. I recommend you check it out if this sort of thing interests you. But he talked about these ideas of remote viewing. If it's your first time hearing this, it's essentially using your mind to see in see things going on in other aspects of the world at the given time and in the past, in the future maybe. It's something so that's one of these things. I think like dream interpretations is a technology as well. And if you don't think these are technologies, I recommend you check out a piece I wrote, The Lost Origin of Technologies. I'm releasing a YouTube video about it as well. I essentially returned to the old definition of technology and sort of demonstrate how we've lost our understanding of what a technology really is. And we kind of just see it as this like electronic software type paradigm, but really protocols that improve the human condition could be seen as technologies. That's kind of the short of it. So think that we're going to see this. Now, one thing I do want to kind of talk through here is as we go into this era, I think there is one warning that's fair to give, and I'm going to end this podcast with this quote from Carl Jung. So Carl Jung wrote a letter. I believe this was actually about psychedelics. Um, and the idea, I think Carl Jung wrote about the psychedelics, and he gave a warning on psychedelics I think it was like to a minister, but it was this idea to be to beware of unearned wisdom. So I'm gonna finish with this quote from Jung, and yeah, and then we will pick up next week. It is really the mistake of our age. We think it is enough to discover new things, but we don't realize that knowing more demands a corresponding development of morality. Radioactive clouds over Japan, Calcutta, Saskatchewan point to progressive poisoning of the universal atmosphere. Like I said, I think we need we need a development of morality and psychology and spirituality alongside of this technological paradigm we find ourselves in. Everybody, thank you for listening, and have a great rest of your week. We will be back here next week to have another interesting discussion, and I'll see what interests me over the week. All right, everybody, take care. Bye.